Recently, I've been working on a machine learning model, and of course, I was building it in Python. And it got me thinking that Python has basically become the language of artificial intelligence. When researchers train machine learning models, analyze enormous data sets, or experiment with systems like ChatGPT, the code they write is very often Python. So without most people even noticing, I think Python has become one of the most important programming languages in the world, definitely at the moment because of the AI boom. But Python has a really weird history, because for nearly 3 decades, one of the world's most important programming language was controlled by one man. Its creator, Guido van Rossum, was known by the very real title called Benevolent Dictator for Life. Yep, that is what they genuinely called him. Guido had the final say over what Python had become, what features were accepted, and the direction that the language would take. Until 2018, when 2 punctuation marks brought his reign to an end. It was these two. The argument over them became so bitter that Guido eventually rage quit the programming language that he created. This is the story of how one programmer's Christmas side project had become the language behind modern AI, and eventually grew so large that even its own creator could not control it. Before Python became the language behind artificial intelligence, it began with another programming language that nobody really remembers. It was called ABC. In the early 1980s, Guido van Rossum was working as a junior programmer at CWI. This was the Netherlands National Research Institute for Mathematics and Computer Science. The team at CWI had an ambitious idea. They wanted to create a programming language for people that were not programmers. Now, at the time, personal computers were becoming more common, and BASIC was often the language beginners encountered first. Now, BASIC isn't a terrible programming language. In fact, it was quite revolutionary because it made programming accessible to students rather than only specialists. However, many popular versions of BASIC encouraged habits that worked for tiny programs but became quite chaotic as the program grew. So a typical BASIC program looks like this. These numbers are not just labels showing where the code appears. The program actively jumps between them. So if x is less than 0, then the program needs to jump to line 60 to see the output, which would be negative. That is manageable with 7 lines, but in a larger program, you might see this. To understand what happens, you must continually search for line 470, then line 700, and then remember where the return actually sends you. Not really readable, and there were many other issues as well. But the team at CWI believed that BASIC was just a terrible way to teach people how to program. So they attempted to build something better. ABC was designed to make programming feel structured, clear, and approachable, even for scientists or other professionals with no formal programming experience. Interestingly, a surprising amount of what we associate with Python actually began here. ABC used indentation to organize code rather than surrounding everything with brackets and symbols. It also included powerful and high-level ways to work with data. And it was just designed around the idea that code should be understandable to a human being, not just executable to a computer. So this code in BASIC looks like this in ABC. It looks clean. So they developed ABC. But after 4 or 5 years, CWI actually terminated the project because it failed to achieve any obvious success. Part of the problem was timing. ABC was intended for people using personal computers, but many personal computers of the period were not powerful enough to run it completely. So when the ABC project ended, Guido moved to another team who were working on an experimental operating system known as Amoeba. And this created a very practical problem. The team needed to build some admin tools for the operating system. They could write it in C, but C required a lot of work for simple tasks. And this is where Guido thought ABC can become important again. But Guido didn't want to revive ABC exactly as it was. He wanted to take the parts that worked, like the readability, the indentation, and the powerful data types, and combine them with the parts that ABC was missing. And this new language would not be in a closed environment. It would work with existing operating systems and programming tools. However, this was not an official CWI project. It was essentially Guido's side project. So in December 1989, Guido's office closed for the Christmas holidays. Guido had a computer at home, some free time, and as he later put it, not much else on his hands. So he began writing the interpreter for his new language. He needed a name. Rather than giving it a serious technical name, he named the language after the British comedy series called Monty Python's Flying Circus. So he settled with Python. If you are enjoying the video so far and want to learn a bit more about Python and more importantly, how to start learning it, my top choice is DataCamp. I've partnered with them for this video because I genuinely think it's one of the best platforms to learn Python and AI. I've personally used it myself and everything is laid out in a structured learning path. So instead of wondering what to learn next, you can simply focus on building your skills step by step. If you are completely new to programming, the Python Fundamentals track is a fantastic place to start. It takes you through all the core concepts like variables, loops, functions, modules, and writing your own Python programs. What I really like is that you're not just sitting there watching videos, you actually write code as you learn through interactive exercises and real projects. I honestly think that's one of the best ways to learn programming. And if you're watching this video because you're interested in Python for AI, they also have their Associate AI Engineer for Developers track. Once you've learned the Python basics, this is a great step because it teaches you how developers are actually using Python to build. You'll learn things like working with OpenAI, LangChain, Hugging Face, prompt engineering, embeddings, vector databases like Pinecone, and how these tools work together to build real AI applications. With more than 19 million learners, it's clear that the approach is working a lot. I've left links to both of the learning tracks right at the top of the description below. Python had learned from ABC's biggest mistakes. ABC wanted programmers to enter a carefully designed world. Python would enter the programmer's world. But when Guido first released Python in 1991, it did not look like the language destined to power artificial intelligence. It was a very small scripting language competing against tools like Perl, Unix, etc. And it wasn't very fast. Python code generally ran a lot more slow than code written in C or C++. But Python offered programmers a different kind of speed. It allowed them to write software faster. Take a simple program that checks whether a number is positive or negative. In the versions of BASIC that many people had grown up using, it could look something like this. Now this program works, but to understand it, you need to follow where the computer jumps. If the number is negative, go to line 60. If it's positive, continue to line 30, print the result, and then jump to line 70. That's a lot. And it's quite hard to read naturally. In Python, the same decision looks like this. There's no line numbers, there's no goto. The indentation is the structure of the program. And you can understand what the code is doing largely by looking at its shape. But readable syntax is not enough because ABC had also been readable and ABC still failed. Python's real advantage was that it could escape its own boundaries. Guido designed Python so programmers could extend it using C. If Python could not perform a particular operation or it could not perform it quickly enough, someone could write that part in a faster, lower level language and then make it available through a simple Python interface. Python could also be embedded inside other applications. Guido would later argue that Python shone when it was used to combine components written in languages such as C or C++. So Python's secret weapon was not Python. It was everything Python could sit on top of. Suppose you write a simple piece of Python code today. This one looks like a straightforward instruction. One line of code. Train the model using this data. But Python may not be performing the most difficult computation itself. Underneath that line could be highly optimized code written in C, C++, even Fortran. There may be specialized mathematical libraries performing matrix operations. There may be code distributing calculations across multiple processor cores. Python just acts as a control panel. The programmer presses a few understandable buttons while enormous complicated machinery operates behind the surface. So this meant that Python could offer two things that normally seems incompatible. It could be easy enough for a beginner to use, while still accessing software written by the most specialized programmers in the world. And nowhere was this more important than scientific computing, because scientists began to notice that Python could give them something unusual. And during the 1990s, developers began building numerical array packages for Python. The result was a very popular library called NumPy. NumPy gave Python a common way to represent numerical data, together with some fast routines for operating on it. It also made it possible to integrate code written in C++, C, and Fortran. So NumPy became this foundation. It became a Goliath. And then other projects started accumulating around it. There was a SciPy library created for scientific algorithms. Matplotlib added visualizations. Pandas made it easier to work with tables and time series data. And then you had new machine learning libraries on top of that, like scikit-learn, TensorFlow, and even PyTorch. And Python became less like one programming language and more like an entrance to this enormous software ecosystem. And that produced a really powerful cycle. Python had been created so that programmers could change software quickly. But Python itself had become incredibly difficult to change. Every library, application, every company that adopted Python became another thing that could break if the language changes. And sometimes change is inevitable. So by this point, Python was no longer a programming language maintained by one man in his spare time. It had become an enormous open source project. Thousands of people contributed code, reported bugs, maintained libraries, wrote documentation, and argued over how the language should evolve. But this created a difficult question. Who actually decides what Python is? Who decides whether a new feature belongs in the language? And what happens when thousands of intelligent programmers all disagree? For most of Python's history, the answer was Guido van Rossum. Now, it sounds like Guido had declared himself the ruler of Python, but that's not what happened. Python was open source, and Guido did not own every program written in Python, nor could he command people to use a particular version of the language. His authority came from the trust of the community. He always wanted what was best for Python. And when developers could not reach an agreement about the language itself, Guido could make the final decision. Now, Python's own documentation described him as a person who oversaw the development process and made decisions when necessary. And even when the developers voted on proposed changes, these votes were historically advisory. Guido could still approve or reject a change when he believed the community was heading in the wrong direction. And strangely enough, his dictatorship worked. When a programming language is young, one person having the final say is really useful. Every programmer has different opinions. Some want the language to be better, some want more features, some wanted to remain simple. And none of these people are necessarily wrong. But Guido acted as a person who could eventually just end the argument. And his most important job was just maintaining a coherent idea of what Python was supposed to be. So Python eventually formalized these debates through documents called PEPs, and that stood for Performance Enhancement Proposal. A PEP explained a suggested change, why it is necessary and how it would work, and what objections have been raised against it. The community could then discuss the proposal, suggest revisions, and try to build consensus. But these discussions can be long. A tiny piece of code may influence millions of programs for decades. So programmers started to become very opinionated over smaller things. Consider Python's conditional expression. Today you can write this, but adding the feature required years of discussion and probably numerous competing designs. Some people want syntax similar to C. Others proposed new keywords. Others argued that Python did not need the feature at all. And this was the value of the benevolent dictator for life. Guido didn't need to intervene every single bug fix or minor improvement. Most decisions were handled by the developers who understood that part of Python, and he could also delegate discussions to trusted experts. Guido was just the final court of appeal. However, the more people used Python, the more opinions there were about what Python should become. And the decisions that reached Guido were usually the ones where no one else could resolve. So then came PEP 572, the walrus operator. Before the walrus operator, a programmer reading chunks from a file might write something like this. Now the code has to read from the file twice, once before the loop, and then again at the bottom of every repetition. Now the proposed operator allowed the assignment to happen inside the condition, making it a bit more simpler. And the walrus operator, which is the symbol, assigns the result to chunk and then immediately makes that value available to the surrounding expression. It became known as a walrus operator because if you look sideways, it sort of looks like a walrus' eyes and tusks. Now, the proposal's supporters argued that it could remove repeated code, avoid calculating the same expression twice, and make certain patterns more direct. Guido himself had examined the real code from Dropbox and found examples where programmers repeated work simply to avoid adding another line or another level of indentation. So the proposal just argued that the assignment expressions could just create modest but very clear improvements. However, many Python developers saw something else. They saw a way for programmers to squeeze more logic into a single line. And if you have worked in Python, you know that it has become successful partly because it discourages clever, complicated lines of code. And this is why the argument had become so intense. The community wasn't really fighting over 2 punctuation marks. It was fighting over Python's identity. Was Python supposed to prevent programmers from writing complicated code? Or should experienced programmers be trusted with a useful feature, even if that feature could be abused? So there was no clear decision that would satisfy everyone. So Guido made the call. He accepted PEP 572. But this actually did not bring the argument to an end. The debate had been unusually exhausting and it had become personal. So on the 12th of July 2018, shortly after the proposal was completed, Guido sent a message to Python's core developers titled Transfer of Power. He said that he never again wanted to fight so hard for a PEP while discovering so many people despised his decisions. He removed himself from the decision-making process and described it as a permanent vacation from being the BDFL. He told the developers that they would be on their own. Guido would remain involved for a time as an ordinary core developer and mentor, but he would no longer be Python's final authority. And importantly, he refused to appoint a successor. He said he was tired and he needed a very long break. So the walrus operator didn't bring down Python, it brought down Python's dictator, unfortunately. And suddenly, the community now had to decide who was allowed to make the decisions. So the community produced several competing proposals. One suggesting appointing a singular technical leader, another proposed 3 equal leaders, and in December 2018, Python's core developers selected a new model. Instead of 1 dictator, Python would have a 5-person steering council. The council would be elected by Python's core developers. It would have the authority to accept or reject major proposals, maintain the quality and stability of the language, and act as a final court of appeal when normal discussions failed. But there was an important principle built into the new system. The council was expected to use that authority as rarely as possible. It should delegate decisions to specialists rather than control every part of the project. And unlike the benevolent dictator for life, its members would face regular elections and could be removed through formal vote of no confidence, which, looking at the size of Python now, this makes sense. And this is what made Python's history so strange. It began as one programmer's answer to the mistakes of ABC. It succeeded because the programmer maintained a clear version of what the language should be. But its ultimate success required Python to become independent of that vision. So the benevolent dictator had helped Python grow, and his resignation had eventually proved that Python had grown beyond him. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.